Hello all! I'm Jackafang, and while my existing audience may know me from my Stars of the City tabletop system, those of you in the Fire Emblem community may recognize my work in Saint Indech's Guide to Fodlan, a full D&D 5th edition campaign setting. I pretty much released this guide 5 years ago, didn't come back for like 2 years, did some updates, left again, and did nothing to actually benefit from or promote the project. Now that I have an established channel and there's a new game on the way, it's time to fix that. If you're not familiar with Index Guide, just sit back and let me tell you all about it. If you stick around to the end of the video, I'll even tell you about my plans for Fortune's Weave. You may or may not be familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, the classic tabletop role-playing game. One person serves as the Dungeon Master, creating the world, its characters, and serving as the rules arbiter and driving the story. Meanwhile, players create their own characters to fill the world, choosing a race, class, and background to determine their abilities. Dungeons & Dragons is the biggest tabletop RPG on the market, and given its focus on grid-based combat and its fantasy setting, it seemed like a pretty good fit for Fire Emblem. Not a perfect fit, mind you, but a pretty good one. Of course, some modifications were needed, and new mechanics would have to come into play. First off, some restrictions on magic. Resurrection is limited to revivify only, serving as a quick way to bring someone back to life as long as they're just mostly dead. Teleportation, specifically long range, is highly limited as well, as is scrying. Finally, Goodberry no longer removes the need for food during travel, but instead serves as just one meal per berry, keeping it powerful but not a solve-all solution for your travel problems. I'll get into the new mechanics later, but let's set the scene first. While you can set the story at any time and in any route, the intent is for the setting to be run around 3 years into the war, in a sort of neutral route, resembling a mix of Azure Moon and Verdant Wind. The guide also comes with a custom map of Fodlan, featuring additional details. I tried to keep this as close to canon as possible, while also adding a few touches of my own to flesh out parts that needed to be filled. This should serve as a very useful resource for your campaigns. The guide features a pretty extensive lore section. Like with the map, I tried to keep things as close to canon as possible, but expanded in areas that were lacking. There were some problematic pieces of lore whose implications were never really explored in-game. I tried to do what I could to keep the integrity of related characters while still not dismissing the issue, but this was always a lose-lose scenario. One particular segment has been rewritten about 3 times now. Anyway, I did try to make a deep collection of mostly canon lore, but these expansions mean that you shouldn't use this as your general lore bible for the original games, just for the tabletop. We have descriptions of each major nation, their noble houses, and notable locations. This should help players who have never touched Fire Emblem in their life to be able to jump into the setting and figure out how their character connects to the world. Speaking of your character, I think we've talked lore enough. Let's get into character creation options. Starting with your class options, we've got 3 new subclasses. Path of the War Master Barbarian serves as the Barbarian's counterpart to the Battlemaster, giving you access to superiority dice and maneuvers. In order to distinguish between the 2 subclasses, your dice are smaller in size, but while raging, you can't roll below your rage damage bonus. In addition, the War Master gets new options not normally available to Barbarians, such as raging in heavy armor, or adding rage bonus to your ranged attacks. As you go further, you get better at finding and earning the trust of smiths and making good use of siege machines. Eventually, you can even attune to additional weapons and armor as you grow your collection. Next, the Rogue's Divine Trickster is predictably a 1/3 caster subclass that gives access to a unique set of spells, centered around support and good uses of bonus actions. This includes a special version of Misty Step that lets you swap places with allies. They also get the ability to turn 7s into crits, starting with just once per short or long rest, and capping out at every single time as the final ability. Finally, the wizard gets the School of Crestology, a scholar dedicated to the study of, you guessed it, crests. They get the ability to manipulate the crest of others, and extend that control to crest-related creatures like demonic beasts and dragons. But they aren't useless when crests aren't in play. Crestologers get the ability to buff the magic of allies, and eventually, when you reach higher levels, you get the ability to bestow minor crests through a magic item, which can lead to some crazy implications in the story. Hey now, wait a minute, we haven't even talked about the crests themselves. Crests were one of the hardest things to develop for this setting. I figured out something that technically works, but as you'll see, there's a major flaw that still remains. When you make your character, you may choose a crest. Each crest has its own effects, some that are activated manually, and others that activate based on conditions. However, as a cost to take your crest, you sacrifice 1 HP per level, so you're still fine to skip out on a crest if it doesn't make sense for your character. Unfortunately, I still needed to make a way to get major crests, and this is the point of improvement. When you pick a crest, roll 1d6. On a 6, your crest is major. Yeah, not the best idea. It does mirror the unfairness of crests in universe, but if I do come back to this guide for proper revisions, I want to figure out something better. Crests are also not all that balanced among themselves. Some are a lot stronger than others. On to races, this one gets slightly weird, as you would expect in a setting primarily filled with humans. I wanted to give meaningful distinctions in this system, so there are a total of 4 races that admittedly stretch the canon more than I'm sure many lore experts would appreciate. But, getting into humans, instead of sub-races, I created the mechanically identical culture subsection. You choose the culture your character was raised in, or the one that fits them best if your character is multicultural, giving your character benefits based on that. For the alternate races, Agarthans have benefits to magic, and can steal the blood of humans to acquire disguises. They're a little messy mechanically, but I think it works overall. Into the less canon races, Homunculus is the natural conclusion to the idea that Citri was an artificial being created by Rhea. It's not canonical as far as I remember, but the basic idea is that these homunculi use crest stones as hearts, and are made as experiments in Rhea's plan to resurrect Sothis. Mechanically, they get a major crest without suffering HP loss, and have some defensive abilities. Finally, Lesser Nabatean is for players who want to play dragons. Obviously, I can't let you be a full dragon, but I also want you to be able to do some cool dragon shit and not just be a pointy-eared human. So you get some cool stuff to do that. Into a quick look at backgrounds, these are not the most important part of making a D&D character, but I made sure to give some options both mechanically and to give story hooks. From Officers Academy students and staff, to playing as a member of those who slither in the dark, or a victim of their experiments. There's also a custom trinkets table to give your character a random early hook, filled with stuff relating to the original game. There's a number of new feats that adapt notable skills from the game, including classics like Vantage and personal skills like Live to Serve. Unfortunately, not all feats are made equal, but hey, what else is new? In a similar vein to feats, we have new spells. A few big hitters like Dark Spikes, some very long-ranged attacks, and even crazy spells like Bore or Quake if you get to high levels. That's all for the player side, but we still have some GM tools to talk about. There's a pretty extensive list of magic items, with a lot of Fire Emblem classics available to add as loot. This includes a full list of heroes' relics, with plenty of crazy abilities to make them feel truly powerful. and a small system for being slowly killed by these relics if you don't have a crest. The bestiary is pretty extensive, featuring new mounts, a plethora of demonic beasts, titanus and church golems, as well as several monsters found across other games, like Sacred Stones and Shadows of Valentia, with new lore to fit them into Fodlan. The biggest portion of the bestiary, however, is the soldiers section, filled to the brim with humans fitting the various Three Houses classes. These guys actually scale up to really high levels, thanks to their damage boost abilities. Masterclass units are CR 9 just on their own, and could even be the BBEG for a mid-level campaign. I've also made 3 stat blocks for notable characters: Edelgard, the Death Knight, and Yuri. I don't necessarily recommend using these major characters in your game, at least as enemies, but you have the option if you want it. Finally, truly finally, we have the optional rule for tactical bonuses and penalties, which includes the classic Fire Emblem weapon triangle, as well as a new form of flanking and a way to make flyers hit easier with bows. Okay, and that's all from my overview, but I want to talk about what it was like making this guide, and what my plans are for the future. Firstly, I am hugely proud of this guide. It's still rough, given it's my first big published homebrew, but goddamn, I put months of work into this thing and it shows. I think this setting guide can stand up against a lot of official D&D products in terms of what content is available. Not that that's a high bar or anything, and I've got a ways to go before reaching anywhere near the level of some of the best third-party works out there. Still, as a solo project, this wasn't bad at all. The original release actually lacked most of the bestiary, and it took 2 years for me to finally get back to it and add the soldiers, as well as the new subclasses and a bunch of the items. I called this the Warfare Update. It was really nice when I came back and I heard that people were actually playing the setting. I'd honestly thought people would read it, want to play a campaign at some point, and then never do so. Unfortunately, after my return, there was a big problem. 3 Hopes had released, and with it, some massive expansions to the lore. Primarily in the little details of each region and the politics within. You know, stuff that most people wouldn't care about, but that anyone trying to make a boots-on-the-ground campaign would need to know. So I set out revising the map and the lore, and also added a few more of the feats and the heroic enemies, creating the Hopes and Heroes update. And now I've determined the project to be 90% complete. If I do get back to it, it'll be to fill out a couple of the enemies I'm missing, like the giant demonic beasts, and also to clean up some of the messier mechanics. For the most part though, this thing is complete. It's got all of the basics in what you need to play 5th edition in Fodlan. D&D 5e is admittedly not the best system for Fire Emblem, though it's easily the most readily available to find players for. D&D operates on a much larger power level, and it isn't ideal for games in slightly more grounded settings with humans as the main enemies. I don't regret the choice to make this 5th edition, especially since I was still relatively new to TTRPGs at the time, but next time I might choose something different. Fortune's Weave is right around the corner, and while I can't say for sure that I'll get quite as hyperfixated on this game as I did 3 Houses, I'm still super hyped, and unless the game is a total snooze fest somehow, I'll be working on some sort of tabletop project involving it. But what system to choose for this project? On the D&D side of things, 5th edition is now outdated, though using it would still keep compatibility with Index Guide. I honestly haven't been keeping up with the 2024 rule set, so I don't know how ideal it would be for this new project. I could certainly use a different system, but anything beyond, say, Pathfinder would struggle to get players. It might just be easier to make a dedicated Fire Emblem TTRPG at that point, since we'd already be losing the accessibility factor. There are other Fire Emblem TTRPGs out there, of course, such as the Fire Emblem TTRPG, the unofficial Fire Emblem TTRPG, and Heroes of Light. But honestly, none of them quite fulfill what I'd want from a Fire Emblem TTRPG. Why is that so hard to say? Anyway, they've definitely had a lot of effort put into them. I just have very specific tastes with these things. Frankly, it seems I'm not quite ready to choose, especially since I haven't gotten my hands on the new game. Whatever system I do choose, rest assured I'll be making videos and/or streams about the process here on my channel. So subscribe if you want to see more. And if you really want to help out and show your thanks, I have a Ko-Fi for donations, and you can also give through YouTube. It's never expected, but always appreciated. I put many months of effort into this guide, and never really asked for anything in return, so I think I've earned the right to shill a bit. While you're here, why not check out my Stars of the City system? Even if you don't play the original Project Moon games, I can promise that the unique combat system is worth checking out. And hey, maybe you'll fall victim to the Project Moon brain rot. Thank you all so much for watching. I know I'm splitting my audience substantially by having these two very different games, but I was never the type of person to stick around for one thing for the entirety of my channel. I hope to slowly transition this channel into one that you'll come to for my insight into game design and storytelling, rather than just the franchises I cover. Still, I'm someone who enjoys adapting my favorite work into new forms, so you can rest assured I'll return to something you love every so often, and you can even introduce me to new franchises I've never interacted with before. And of course, Stars of the City is far from being done, so have no worries there. I've got so much more over the horizon with that project. Okay, this video is getting long, and we've finished the main bulk of content. I'm heading out, see you all later, and enjoy your day. Bye bye!